The cold seeped through the stone floors of the keep, a familiar chill that lived not just in the walls, but in Ayla's very bones. At 19, she had perfected the art of invisibility, a ghost in her own home. She moved through the grand, drafty halls with a silence born of necessity, her worn leather slippers making no sound. In her hands, she clutched a small slate and a nub of chalk, her only voice in a world that had forgotten she ever had one. A thin, pale scar, a delicate silver crescent across her throat, was a constant reminder of the day a beast had stolen her words forever. Her family saw it not as a mark of survival, but as a brand of imperfection. The scarred mute, a broken thing. In the great hall, her stepsister Rosalind preened before a silver mirror, her laughter like a cascade of breaking glass. She caught Ayla's reflection and sneered. "Still scribbling your little secrets, shadow sister? Does it hurt, knowing no one cares what you have to say?" Ayla flinched, pulling her threadbare shawl tighter, and hurried toward the kitchens, the only place that offered a sliver of warmth. There, among the clatter of pots and the scent of baking bread, she would eat her meal alone, a plate of leftovers shoved onto the corner of a work table. The cook, a stout woman named Ilara, would sometimes offer a sad smile, a kindness more profound than any Ayla had ever received from her own blood. That evening the air grew even colder. Her father, Lord Corbin, stood before the hearth, his face a mask of grim calculation. "I have made a decision," he announced to his wife and Rosalind, ignoring Ayla, who stood by the doorway, tasked with refilling his wine. "To settle our dispute with the Northern Territories, I will make a gesture of goodwill to the Wolf King." Lady Morwenna, her stepmother, placed a delicate hand on his arm. "Corbin, what kind of gesture? We cannot afford to part with more gold." Her father's eyes, cold as chips of flint, flickered toward Ayla for a fraction of a second. A tremor of pure dread, icy and sharp, shot down Ayla's spine. She knew. She was the gesture. Later, hidden in the shadows of the tapestry-lined corridor, she heard the truth of it. The whispers were sharp, merciless. "The beast demands a tribute for the land I claimed," her father hissed to his wife. "He wants blood or gold. I will give him neither." Lady Morwenna's voice was a venomous whisper in return. "So you send her?" There was a pause, thick with shared contempt. "Better her," Lord Corbin finally said, the words striking Ayla with the force of a physical blow. "She is a useless mouth to feed, a constant embarrassment. No one will miss her." The words didn't break her. They simply confirmed what she had always known. She was a debt, a flaw, a thing to be discarded. With a devastating calm that felt like the stillness at the bottom of a frozen lake, she walked to her small, windowless room. There was little to pack. A change of clothes, as rough and gray as her life, and a small wooden bird, its wings chipped and its paint faded. Her mother had carved it for her years ago, in a life before the scar, before the silence. It was the only proof she had that she was ever loved. She tucked it into the small cloth bag, its familiar weight a cold comfort in her palm. She was being sent to a monster, a sacrifice to appease a king of wolves. She believed she was walking to her death, and in the deepest, most wounded part of her soul, she felt it was exactly what she deserved. The border was a line drawn in frost and silence. Ayla was left beside a gnarled, ancient pine, a solitary figure in a world of biting wind and deepening twilight. Her thin cloak was useless against the cold that seemed to rise from the frozen earth itself. She clutched the small cloth bag to her chest, the shape of the wooden bird a familiar cold comfort against her ribs. This, she thought with a strange and hollow calm, was the end, a small sacrifice for the greater good. Her father's words echoed in the empty space her own voice used to occupy. She was a debt being paid. She did not have to wait long. They did not burst from the woods with howls and snapping teeth. They emerged from the shadows as if they were made of them. 6 figures, then 7. They were immense, larger than any men she had ever seen, wrapped in heavy furs and leather that did little to hide the raw, coiled power in their forms. Their steps were silent on the snow-dusted ground. They did not walk. They stalked, moving with a predatory grace that made the air crackle. At their center was a man who was not a man, but a mountain. He was a monolith of muscle and fur, his shoulders as broad as a castle gate, his hair a wild mane of black kissed with silver, like a storm cloud under a full moon. Ayla's breath hitched, a tiny, soundless gasp. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was him, the Wolf King. She squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles white as she gripped her small bag. She waited for the crushing grip, the tearing claws, the final brutal darkness. She offered no resistance. A broken thing does not fight the hand that comes to sweep it away. But the killing blow never came. Instead, there was silence. A deep, profound silence that was more unnerving than any snarl. It was a silence that held weight, that watched and waited. Slowly, hesitantly, she opened her eyes. The Wolf King stood before her, not 10 feet away. But he was not looming. He was kneeling. He had lowered his colossal frame to one knee in the snow, a gesture so shockingly unexpected it stole the air from her lungs. His eyes, she saw now, were not the black pits of a monster, but a liquid, shining silver, like 2 molten moons. They held no hunger, no cruelty. They held an intensity that stripped her bare, that seemed to see past the worn clothes, past the pale scar, and into the very core of her trembling soul. He extended a hand. It was huge, the fingers thick and calloused, the back laced with scars that told tales of 100 battles. It was a hand made for wielding an axe or snapping a neck, but it was offered palm up, an invitation, not a demand. A soft thunder rumbled from his chest, a voice that was both gravel and velvet. "You are safe here." The words were so simple, yet they were a language she had never heard. They were a concept as foreign as the warmth of a summer sun. Before she could process it, one of the warriors behind him stepped forward, his lip curled in a sneer that was achingly familiar. "My king, they insult us," the warrior growled, his gaze flicking over Ayla with contempt. "They sent the broken one, the mute." The words were a slap, a reminder of what she was. Ayla flinched, her gaze falling to the frozen ground, shame burning hot in her chest. But the king did not turn. His silver eyes never left her face. He rose slowly to his full, terrifying height, a storm held in check. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried the absolute authority of an earthquake. It was directed at all who could hear, yet it felt as though it was meant only for her. "They called her a burden," he declared, his silver gaze locking with hers, holding her captive. "I call her my treasure." He took a step closer, his presence a wall of heat in the frigid air. "What their blindness cast aside as broken, my soul recognized as perfect." The world tilted on its axis. The words did not compute. They were a key to a lock she never knew existed. She stared at him, her mind reeling. Treasure? Perfect. It was a cruel joke. It had to be. But there was no mockery in those silver eyes. There was only a fierce, unwavering certainty. He saw her. Not the scar, not the silence, but her. He saw the tremor that ran through her thin frame, a product of both fear and cold. Without a word, he unclasped the great heavy cloak from his own shoulders. It was thick wolf fur, dark as midnight and lined with black wool. He stepped forward and draped it around her. The weight was immediate, a heavy, comforting pressure. But it was the warmth that shattered her composure. It was a living heat, saturated with the scent of pine, clean snow, and something else, something wild and deeply masculine. It seeped through her worn dress, into her skin, chasing away a chill that had lived in her bones for a decade. No one had ever given her their cloak. No one had ever offered her warmth. He gestured to a massive black warhorse that stood nearby, its breath pluming in the icy air. With a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man his size, he placed his hands on her waist and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He set her sideways on the creature's broad back, arranging his cloak around her until she was fully cocooned in its protective embrace. He did not mount behind her. Instead, he took the horse's reins in his hand and began to walk, leading her away from the desolate border and into the heart of the darkening woods. His warriors fell into step behind them, a silent, formidable guard. Ayla clutched the thick fur of his cloak, her face buried in its warmth, and for the first time in her life, the fear that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a fragile, bewildering emotion. It was the feeling of being, against all logic and experience, utterly and completely safe. The journey into the mountain's heart was a passage into another world. The fortress, which Ayla had imagined as a grim, cold warren of stone, was nothing of the sort. They passed through immense gates of iron and oak into a great hall that felt alive. It was carved from the living rock, yes, but the stone was warmed by the glow of a dozen massive hearths. The air, thick with the scent of pine smoke, roasting meat, and melting beeswax, was a living thing, a stark contrast to the thin, damp chill of her father's keep. Polished wood floors were strewn with thick furs of bear and wolf, and the stone walls were hung with woven tapestries depicting not battles, but hunts, migrations, and the turning of the seasons. Lycans, both in human and wolf form, paused in their duties to watch them pass. Their gazes were curious, intense, but held none of the familiar pity or disgust she had grown to expect. They looked at her not as a broken thing, but as a marvel, their king's chosen, and they lowered their heads in a gesture of profound respect. Fenrir led her not to a cell, but to a suite of chambers that stole her breath. A fire already crackled in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on walls of warm, honey-colored wood. A bed, piled high with wolf pelts and thick wool blankets, looked larger and softer than any she had ever seen. He turned to her, his silver eyes gentle. "This belongs to the Luna," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. He gestured to an elderly she-wolf with kind eyes and hair the color of snow. "Greta will see to your needs. You are home now, Ayla. Rest." He left, closing the heavy wooden door with a quiet click, leaving her in a silence that felt like a sanctuary, not an isolation. Greta's smile was warm, crinkling the corners of her eyes. She did not speak, but guided Ayla with gentle hands toward an adjoining room. It was a bath chamber, steam rising from a sunken pool of water that smelled of lavender and mint. The old woman helped her shed the thin, grimy dress, the last remnant of her old life, without a flicker of judgment at the sight of her thin frame or the pale crescent scar on her throat. The moment Ayla slipped into the hot water, a shudder ran through her. It was a heat that sank deep into her muscles, unknotting years of tension. It felt like forgiveness. Greta washed her hair with a soft, fragrant soap, her movements practiced and maternal. For the first time since her own mother had died, Ayla was being cared for. Tears, hot and silent, mixed with the bathwater, washing away not just the dirt, but the deep, ingrained feeling of being a burden. Afterward, Greta wrapped her in a thick, heated towel and led her back to the main chamber. Laid out on the bed were new clothes, a simple tunic of the softest gray wool, leggings of supple, dark leather, and fur-lined boots. They fit as if they were made for her. When she was dressed, Greta brought a tray of food, a bowl of rich, savory stew, a thick slice of dark bread, and a mug of mulled cider. Ayla ate until she was full, a sensation so foreign it felt like a miracle. In the days that followed, the fortress became her world. She learned to navigate its winding halls and open courtyards, always finding a warm fire or a kind face. She discovered her place not through command, but through her own quiet nature. Her empathy, once a source of shame, was a gift here. She could feel the pack's emotions as a current in the air. She found she could soothe the restless wolf pups in the nursery with a simple, steady presence, her own calm radiating outward and quieting their anxieties. The pups in turn would clamber over her, licking her hands and face, their unconditional affection a balm to her wounded soul. One afternoon she noticed a massive warrior, a beta named Kale, sitting alone, his powerful shoulders slumped. Others gave him a wide berth, sensing his dark mood. But Ayla felt something else beneath the anger, a hollow, aching grief. She approached him slowly and sat nearby, not speaking, not touching, simply offering her silent company. After a long while, he turned to her, his eyes wet. "It is the anniversary," he rasped. "The day I lost my mate." He spoke to her for an hour, pouring out the pain he had held inside for years. She just listened, her presence a safe harbor for his sorrow. When he was done, a weight had lifted from him. From that day on, Kyle bowed deeper to her than he did to any other, save Fenrir himself. She was not a mute, a broken thing. Here, she was a healer, a listener, the heart of the pack. One evening, she stood on a high balcony overlooking the snow-covered valley, the twin moons casting a silver glow over the silent pines. The cold air was crisp and clean against her skin, but she no longer felt the bone-deep chill of her past. She heard his silent footsteps behind her. Fenrir came to stand beside her, his massive presence a comforting wall against the night. He didn't speak for a long time, simply sharing the silence with her. When he did, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Before you came," he began, his silver gaze on the horizon. "This was all just territory, stone and snow, a kingdom to be protected. I was its king, but my soul was a fortress with no one inside." He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight. "Now, it is a home." He saw her hand drift unconsciously to her throat, her fingers tracing the delicate line of her scar, a habit born of shame. He reached out, his large, calloused hand impossibly gentle as he stopped her. "May I?" he murmured. She gave a small, hesitant nod. With the reverence of a priest touching a holy relic, he traced the scar with the tip of his finger. A shiver, not of fear, but of something electric and new, ran through her. "This is not a mark of shame," he said, his voice a low, fierce whisper. "It is the mark of a queen. It is proof that the world tried to break you, tried to silence you, and you survived." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek, his scent of pine and winter air enveloping her. "The mate bond is not a choice, Ayla. It is a recognition. The moment I saw you, my soul knew. It had been waiting." In that moment, under the light of the twin moons, all the broken pieces of her life clicked into place. The years of being invisible, the pain of being discarded, it had all led her here, to this man, to this place. He did not see her as incomplete. He saw her as whole. He saw her silence not as an absence, but as a presence. He saw her scar not as a flaw, but as a testament to her strength. She looked up into his molten silver eyes, and for the first time, she did not see a king or a monster. She saw her other half. A feeling bloomed in her chest, warm and powerful, a love so profound it needed no words. She leaned forward, rising onto her toes, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not one of passion, but of homecoming, a silent vow, a perfect understanding. The bond settled between them, a golden thread woven into the fabric of their souls. She was no longer Ayla, the scarred mute, the discarded tribute. She was Ayla, Luna of the North, and she was finally, irrevocably, home. The news came with the spring thaw, carried by a scout whose wolf had scented desperation on the southern winds. A blight, black and creeping, had devoured the farmlands of the human territories. Lord Corbin's keep, once merely cold, was now starving. Ayla heard the report while seated beside Fenrir in the great council chamber, a map of the mountains spread before them. She felt no flicker of fear, no pang of nostalgia. The life she'd led there felt like a story read from a book about a girl she no longer knew. When the scout announced that her father and stepsister were journeying to their border to beg an audience, a profound stillness settled over her. It was not dread, but resolve. A final, loose thread from her past had appeared, and it was time to snip it clean. They were granted entry to the throne room, a place of immense living power carved from the mountain's heart. Lord Corbin and Rosalind were a study in decay. His fine robes were frayed, his face gaunt with the hollowed-out look of a man whose authority had crumbled. Rosalind, pushed forward by her father, wore a gown of faded silk, her practiced beauty curdled by hunger and fear. They blinked against the warmth and light of the hall, their eyes struggling to adjust to a world of plenty. Then they saw her. Ayla sat on a throne of polished ironwood and white wolf fur, an equal to the king beside her. Her hair, once dull and lifeless, now shone like a raven's wing. She was dressed in soft, dark wools and supple leather, a silver torque at her neck that rested just above the pale crescent of her scar, turning the mark of shame into an ornament of royalty. She was not merely healthy, she was radiant, imbued with a quiet power that made her former family look like ghosts. Corbin's eyes widened for a moment before he masked his shock, his gaze skittering away from her as if she were an apparition. He addressed only Fenrir, his voice a pathetic imitation of his old arrogance. "Great king," he began, bowing low. "A blight has fallen upon our lands. We come to you in desperation. In exchange for grain and aid, I offer you a true prize." He shoved Rosalind forward. "My daughter, Rosalind, a worthy addition to any court." Fenrir did not move. His silver eyes were chips of ice, his massive form a study in restrained violence. The air in the room grew heavy, cold, but he did not speak. Instead, he made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand, turning his gaze to Ayla. The entire hall, filled with warriors and elders, held its breath. The decision was hers. Slowly, Ayla rose. The silence was absolute. She met her father's gaze, and for the first time he could not look away. He saw not the broken, silent girl he had discarded, but a queen. Her hands rose and she began to move them. It was not the frantic chalk-scratching of her youth, but a language of fluid, undeniable grace. Each gesture was precise, elegant, and sharp as a blade. Beside the throne, a Lycan elder, her official translator, gave her signs of voice, his tone as cold and clear as a winter stream. "You came to these lands once before to offer a daughter," the voice rang out, echoing Ayla's movements. "You called her a sacrifice. Now you return, starving, to offer another. You do not seek aid. You seek to trade a daughter you valued for the one you threw away, hoping her new position might profit you." Ayla's hands paused, then formed a final sharp sign. "Your bargains have no power here. My answer is no." The finality of it hung in the air. Rosalind stared, her mouth agape, while Corbin's face turned a mottled shade of red and white. Before he could stammer a reply, Fenrir stood. The movement was like a mountain shifting. The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees, and a low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the stone floor. He descended the steps, his silver eyes blazing with a fury so pure it was terrifying. He stopped before Lord Corbin, dwarfing him completely. "You dare," Fenrir's voice was a low earthquake, "to enter my home and attempt to barter with me using the sister of my soul. You, who cast out a treasure you were too blind to see." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You came here to beg from the monster, but the only monster in this room is the father who sells his children. You thought you were paying a debt. Instead, you gave me the greatest gift this kingdom has ever known. You gave me my queen." He straightened, his voice booming with absolute authority. "Now return to your barren lands. They are a perfect reflection of your heart. You will have no aid from us. Live with the consequences of your choice." He turned his back on them, a dismissal more profound than any execution. Guards materialized from the shadows and escorted the stunned, broken humans from the hall. Ayla watched them go, feeling not a shred of hatred nor the sweet burn of revenge. There was only a vast, quiet peace. The last chain had been broken. The wound was finally closed. She walked to Fenrir, who stood waiting for her, the storm in his eyes already calming as he looked at her. She reached up, her hand gentle on the hard line of his jaw, drawing his gaze down to hers. In the silent hall, surrounded by her true family, she looked into the silver eyes of the man who saw her, the man who knew her soul. A sound, fragile as a bird's wing, rustled in her throat. For the first time since she was a child, she gave voice to her heart. Home.